Neal Battaglia, Saxophone.com. I want to talk about the movements of your fingers while you're playing the saxophone. And basically, there's two major kinds of movement when you're playing. You can either press a key, or you can lift and let the key come up. And these actually have pretty different characteristics. When you're pressing, you can easily overpress, so you don't want to press too hard. You really want to just press enough to get the right pressure to close the key and not have a leak. If you need to press really hard to not get a leak, you probably have a problem with the pad. If you need to overcompensate with extra pressure, that means there's probably an issue with the pad itself, and you might need to get it replaced. So basically, if you press, you want to press not too hard, but if you lift, you're not actually lifting anything yourself. It's the spring within the saxophone that's lifting the pad up, which is connected to all the key work. So pressing, lifting. Lifting is kind of controlled by your finger. If you have your finger on the key, then you can control the speed of the lift. But you can go too fast, and that will cause it to go faster. If you control it more, it will cause it to go slower. If your finger's in contact with the key, then you control that. If your finger flies away, it's whatever the spring wants to do. If the spring is strong, it'll be faster. If the spring is weaker, it'll be less strong. So sometimes if you jerk away like that, you can actually make the next note be sharp, because not only is it opening faster, but it might cause some sort of reaction in your body. Everything's kind of connected as you play. So if you move your fingers, you might have pressure in your shoulders. You just will play in a different way than if you're relaxed and if you move with controlled motions. So think about that, the pressing, and you can also press too fast. If you press too fast, maybe you're going to make a bad transition with a note. If you pull away too fast, maybe you'll make a bad transition. So your fingers are very key when you play the saxophone. And unlike a clarinet or an open hold flute, you actually can just keep your fingers on all the keys at all the time. Pretty much. There's maybe if I'm pressing this key, I'm going to have to move these fingers away from the keys a little bit more. But if you're playing most of the notes, you can basically keep your fingers on the keys, whether they're pressed or up, they're on the keys. And actually, one thing that's interesting about the soprano is I can play and I can see all the keys as I'm playing. If you're playing alto or a tenor or a bari, it's more like this. You can't really see the tips of your fingers. On the soprano, you actually can see the tips of your fingers, which is interesting for me. I'd never really thought about that too much, or really even played too much soprano until earlier this year. So, but again, like all the saxophones, they basically function the same way. You press, you release, and that's going to affect your sound. It can change the intonation, it can change the tuning, you can go flat or sharp, depending on how quickly you press something down or how fast you let it go. So a lot of times, if you're having problems with tuning or intonation as you're playing a piece, you might actually want to think more about your fingers rather than just the position of the mouthpiece or just your throat. Those are all factors as well, like where the mouthpiece is, that's going to change the length of the saxophone tube. What you're doing inside your body is a huge factor as well. But sometimes everything becomes easier if your fingers have solid technique, if you're using control, if you're pressing at the right speed, if you're not jerking away, if you're not slamming down the keys. So that's another reason to think about how your fingers move and the technique. Everything sounds better, you'll be more in tune, you'll have more control, you play more of what you actually want to play. It'll be easier if you have control with your fingers. So yeah, it's just another thing to think about. And yeah, basically the main keys on the front, those are the ones you probably would tend to lift or press faster or slower than you should. And yeah, that can be another problem. If you lift up too slowly, basically it's not going to be open in time for the note you want to play. So you don't want to move too fast, you don't want to move too slow. You might want to maybe err on the side of being a little bit too slow if you're first thinking about all of this, because people tend to move like too fast or use too much pressure or lift their fingers too fast. I would say maybe sometimes, once in a while, you will be late with a key. And if you're needing to press multiple keys at the same time, it's very important for them to be synchronized. Like if you're pressing a C sharp and you press the low C key and the low C sharp key, but it's like one after another, that's not going to work too well. It's not going to really give you the note you want at the time you want it to sound. So yeah, think about lifting and pressing in conjunction with your different fingers, and even with an individual finger. If you're going from like F to E, like how fast you press this down, how fast you lift it up, is going to be a factor. And if you notice it's flat, maybe you're lifting it up too slowly. If you notice it's sharp quickly, maybe you're lifting it too fast. So again, and one of the things is just to be aware of your fingers, to kind of focus on your fingers as you play, and it can kind of clean some things up. So think about how fast you press, think about how you lift, and think about how lifting and pressing are just different motions, and they're affected by different things. If you press, you are pressing against the spring, but you can press harder than the spring can pull up. If you're lifting your finger, it can only go as fast as the maximum that would be allowed by that spring. So think about that sometimes.